Justice delayed is justice denied, goes the legal saying. By that definition, the European Court of Human Rights and British courts have manifestly denied justice. It's taken 8 years to extradite the radical Muslim critic Abu Hamza to the United States. Tonight, police removed Hamza and 4 other defendants from Long Lartin prison and put them onto 2 planes set for America. But the case has raised serious questions about the extradition process and severely tested Britain's relationship to the European Court. Sancha Berg report contains flash photography.
Just hours after his appeal failed, Abu Hamza was on his way from Long Lartin maximum security prison in the West Midlands to an airfield and a US penitentiary. One of the most notorious figures in Britain, described by his own lawyers as a pantomime villain, was finally leaving the country. Soon, Abu Hamza and the other 4 defendants will be on their way, flying Con Air to the United States in a US Department of Justice plane with federal marshals on board. But it's 8 years since the original extradition hearing. Why has it taken so long? From the 1990s, amongst his own followers, he called for violence.
Don't ask him, shall I do this, shall I do? Just do it! Anything will help the father, do it! If it's killing, do it! If it's pain, pay! If it's ambushing, ambush! If it's anything, poisoning, poison!
In television interviews, he refused to condemn Al-Qaeda's bombings of US embassies in Africa.
And you support the message of killing 200 people in order to send a message?
They were not meant to be murdered.
So you repudiate the attack then?
We don't target civilians,
you
no way.
You repudiate, you say it was wrong then?
No, I don't say it was wrong.
In 2003, there were 7 arrests at Finsbury Park Mosque where he preached. Police found a stun gun, replica firearms and CS gas canisters. Just over a year later, in May 2004, Abu Hamza was arrested on a US extradition warrant. Charges included setting up a training camp in Oregon and arranging a kidnapping in Yemen. But in October 2004, he was charged in the UK with 15 offences under the Terrorism Act. That halted the process. Found guilty, he was imprisoned in 2006.
I think it's largely a waste of time, though it was very good lawyers' fees, of course, because he should have been sent to the United States. There, perhaps, his defence lawyers would have got him off, so be it. What is it with British lawyers, British judges, British prosecutors, I don't know, nobody knows, that they think that justice delayed now is something that they can accept?
In May 2007, the extradition began again with a preliminary hearing in London. His lawyers went to the European Court of Human Rights. That halted the process. It took till 2010 for the first hearing.
Many thousands of cases have flooded in particular from Eastern Europe, from countries such as Russia, Turkey, Romania and Poland. The court is therefore struggling with a very large backlog of cases, something like 80,000, 90,000, depending on the figures, depending on which figures you look at. And the court is often struggling, it's got limited resources, some of these cases are very, very complex, and that tends to slow up its proceedings to some extent.
They delivered their verdict in April 2012 and then 2 weeks ago turned down Abu Hamza's appeal against it. Extradition would be lawful because the conditions in the US would not be inhuman or degrading. But then lawyers for Abu Hamza and the other defendants went back to the British High Court. That it's taken so long has angered the head of the justice system itself, as he made clear last week.
I'm not going to comment about an individual case, but any case that takes 8 years through a whole series of judicial processes to come to a conclusion, and you've made the point that it hasn't yet come to a conclusion, is a source of real fury to me.
One veteran MP says it's time for Parliament to get involved.
I think the Justice Select Committee should be looking at why it is that these incredible delays, what is the extra protection that terrorists, alleged terrorists, in due course convicted terrorists have, why is it that the QCs and judges bend over backwards? And I think it's time for a proper examination. Most MPs are terrified to mention judges or criticise them, but in this case I think it's overdue that we have a proper parliamentary examination of why justice is so delayed in this area of law and courts.
Abu Hamza himself will soon have left the country, but the questions raised by his extradition remain.
Well, joining me in the studio is Conservative MP Mark Reckless, who sits on the Home Affairs Committee, and down the line, in his first interview since the verdict, Abu Hamza's lawyer, Alan Jones QC. Alan Jones QC, you're the man who represents Abu Hamza. What's been his reaction tonight to this verdict?
Oh, well, I haven't spoken to him today at all. I think he was expecting this. In fact, we were all expecting it. I think it's been clear since the European Court of Human Rights made its decision in April that it was final, and nobody expected the Home Office to conduct what we thought were the necessary medical tests to determine whether he was fit to be extradited. You can't seriously then have thought you were going to succeed with today's appeal. It was in effect a delaying tactic. No, it wasn't a delaying tactic. We had a consultant psychiatrist who gave his opinion to the Home Office on the 10th of August of this year that there had been a deterioration in Abu Hamza's mental condition attributable to sleep deprivation for 8 years. He's been kept in conditions of the utmost severity in Belmarsh prison with very severe disabilities, and his recommendation was that there should be an MRI scan, his recommendation given on the 10th of August, which the Home Office ignored. But I don't think those are the main points. I'd like to deal with the question of delay, which you've been discussing. And of course there has been formidable delay. The point which has not been made, and ought to be made loudly and clearly, is that Abu Hamza ought to have been tried in this jurisdiction for the crimes alleged against him. We'll come to that, Mr. Jones, but you know, we've got the Lord Chief Justice saying now that your achievement here, the 8 years of delay, are a source of real fury to him. Surely now, you know, we all have to accept the law here has been made to look like an ass. Oh, there are very serious faults in the way extradition proceedings are handled. But don't call it an achievement to delay for 8 years. The delay has been built in by Abu Hamza serving a sentence of imprisonment and criminal proceedings brought in this country in 2004. And that caused the extradition proceedings to be interrupted until 2007. The proceedings themselves took place between 2007 and June of 2008, and since then the delays have been caused in the European Court of Human Rights, where Abu Hamza's complaint was held admissible in part, as were those of the other defendants, and it was treated with enormous significance and importance by the European Court of Human Rights until the appeal was dismissed in this year. So the delays are endemic in the extradition process. Of course they're serious. How we sort them out in Europe, I don't know. That court is overburdened with work. But the history of delays is a consequence of using extradition proceedings instead of trying the matters as they should have been tried in this jurisdiction. Mr. Jones, we'll come back to that and the question of the European Court. Stay with us, please. I'm just turning now to Mark Reckless MP. You sit on the Home Affairs Select Committee. You too have met the man, Abu Hamza. You met him in prison. What's your reaction to seeing him arrive, I think, at Mildenhall just now to get on a plane to the United States?
Well, like I think most people in the country, at last. I mean, it's taken such a long time. It's been a lot of money, including taxpayers' money, spent, and finally this extradition is now going ahead. But the delays inherent in this process are because we have a European Convention on Human Rights that's incorporated for over a decade into our domestic law. Our own courts, to the highest level, rule on that and say, whether it's Abu Qatada or Abu Hamza, that they can be deported, yet we then wait for this separate process for the Strasbourg court to rule on something that our own courts have already determined on the basis of that international law.
Do you think in the detail of today's court judgment there is some strengthening actually of the position of British courts?
Absolutely. I mean, MPs such as myself and Dominic Raab, we've argued for some time that it is entirely lawful for the government to proceed with deporting either Abu Hamza or Abu Qatada, put them on their plane. Their lawyers may go to the High Court, and as we've seen within a week or two, the High Court's upheld previous domestic decisions. And what I think we've got in this judgment is the strongest indication yet from the UK judiciary that it is their decision that matters. And when the government, Dominic Grieve or Theresa May, when they say that a Rule 39 injunction from Strasbourg prevents the deportation, actually we see our judges saying no, it's not an injunction, it's only an indication, and all it does is indicate under the rules of the Strasbourg court that it's not desirable.
If that interpretation is right, there are other people sitting in British jails who will probably be quite swiftly on a plane themselves, aren't there?
They could be. I believe we have the clearest judicial indication that they could be, and as I and others have been arguing for a long time, the government just needs to test that law, move to put those people on a plane. There may be a quick judicial review in the High Court, but on the basis of what the judges in this judgment have been saying, and other judges more senior sort of extrajudicially, that it's UK judgments that matter, and we shouldn't be waiting years and years to wait for Strasbourg to make its own decision.
Mr. Jones?
Well, I agree with Mr. Reckless that it's good that British judges are asserting themselves over these important international matters. But what I'd like to hear Mr. Reckless discuss is why British judges should not be pronouncing upon the merits of the allegations made against people like Abu Hamza and all the others whose cases have finished today. In every case, the allegations against those people could have been tried in this country, where the judicial qualities which Mr. Reckless wants to see brought to bear could be applied in every one of those cases, which is where the people are found, it's where they were arrested, it's where many of them are arrested, where their homes are, where their families are, where their defence witnesses are. And I would like to see a self-assertion by the UK Criminal Justice Act system over crimes of an international character which could be tried in this jurisdiction, and where common sense dictates and the factors relevant to the case, where the evidence is, demonstrate should be tried in this jurisdiction. And it is the failure to apply any sensible test, any objective assessment as to where one case should be tried, here or the United States, which has resulted in these delays.
Mr. Jones, let me just ask Mark Reckless here in the studio. The European Court itself has been criticised over its own sort of delay and the number of cases it has in backlog. But the British court system, hasn't been particularly effective here either, has it?
Well, some of the delay for Abu Hamza was because he was convicted domestically and was serving that sentence back in 2007, 2008. I think our courts here took about a year. Perhaps there's some arguments we could change the statutory appeals and the way they interact with judicial review. But it was only a year of that process that were our courts, and now the last week or two that have been the UK courts. The far bigger delay has been Europe, and what we see in this judgment is we really shouldn't and don't need to wait for Strasbourg. We can make our own decisions, and our government should follow our courts here.
Mark Reckless, thank you very much. Alan Jones QC down the line from Tunbridge Wells, thank you, and